story of the British Empire is one of the most extensive and influential in global history. It spans over 4 centuries and encompasses the rise, expansion, peak, and eventual dissolution of a vast imperial network that shaped economies, politics, cultures, and societies around the world. From its modest beginnings on the fringes of Europe to becoming the most powerful empire the world has ever known, the British Empire's story is a sweeping tale of ambition, conquest, commerce, governance, resistance, and legacy. Early beginnings and maritime ambitions. The seeds of British imperial ambition were sown in the late 15th and early 16th centuries during the Age of Discovery. As Spain and Portugal charted new routes to the Americas and Asia, England, under King Henry VII, began to take tentative steps toward maritime exploration. In 1497, John Cabot, a Venetian navigator sailing under the English flag, landed on the coast of Newfoundland. Though this voyage did not result in permanent settlement, it signaled the beginning of English interest in overseas exploration. It was not until the reign of Queen Elizabeth I in the late 16th century that England began to seriously pursue colonial ventures. Driven by economic motives, religious zeal, and rivalry with Catholic Spain, English privateers such as Sir Francis Drake raided Spanish treasure fleets, while adventurers attempted to establish colonies in the New World. The most famous early attempt was the Roanoke colony, founded in 1585, which mysteriously disappeared. Despite this failure, the ambition to establish overseas settlements persisted. Establishment of early colonies. The first permanent English colony was founded in 1607 at Jamestown, Virginia. Sponsored by the Virginia Company, Jamestown faced severe hardships in its early years, including starvation, disease, and conflict with indigenous peoples. However, the introduction of tobacco cultivation provided a sustainable economic model and marked the beginning of plantation-based economies in British colonies. Throughout the 17th century, England established colonies along the eastern seaboard of North America, including Plymouth, 1620, Massachusetts Bay, 1630, Maryland, 1634, and others. These colonies were often founded by religious groups seeking freedom from persecution, such as the Puritans and Quakers. Simultaneously, English interest in the Caribbean grew, and colonies such as Barbados, 1627, and Jamaica, 1655, became crucial centers of sugar production, reliant heavily on enslaved African labor. The slave trade and economic expansion. The British Empire became deeply involved in the transatlantic slave trade. British ships transported millions of Africans across the Atlantic to work on plantations in the Caribbean and the Americas. This trade was part of the triangular route: manufactured goods from Britain to Africa, slaves from Africa to the Americas, and raw materials back to Britain. The wealth generated from sugar, tobacco, and later cotton plantations fueled the British economy and funded further colonial ventures. By the late 17th and early 18th centuries, Britain had also begun to establish a presence in Asia. The English East India Company, founded in 1600, set up trading posts in Surat, Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta. Though initially focused on trade, especially in spices, textiles, and tea, the company gradually became involved in local politics, leveraging divisions within the Mughal Empire to gain territorial control. Imperial wars and global rivalry. The 18th century was marked by a series of wars that significantly expanded British colonial holdings. The War of Spanish Succession, 1700–1714. The War of Austrian Succession, 1740–1748. And most significantly, the 7 Years' War, 1756–1763, saw Britain and France vying for global supremacy. The 7 Years' War ended with Britain gaining Canada from France, dominance in India, and increased power in the Caribbean. However, not all developments favored Britain's imperialism. In the American colonies, increasing resentment over taxation and lack of representation led to the American Revolution. The Declaration of Independence in 1776 and the subsequent war ended in 1783, with Britain recognizing the independence of the United States. Though this was a significant blow, it did not signal the end of the empire. Instead, it redirected British efforts toward Asia, Africa, and the Pacific. India, the jewel in the crown. India became the centerpiece of the British Empire. Following the Battle of Plassey in 1757, where British forces under Robert Clive defeated the Nawab of Bengal, the East India Company gained control of large territories. Over the next century, it expanded its rule through military conquest and alliances. British rule disrupted traditional economies, introduced new legal and educational systems, and extracted immense wealth. In 1857, growing resentment among Indian soldiers and civilians erupted into the Indian Rebellion, also known as the Sepoy Mutiny. Though brutally suppressed, the rebellion led to the dissolution of the East India Company. In 1858, the British government assumed direct control of India, marking the beginning of the British Raj. Queen Victoria was declared Empress of India in 1876, and India remained under British rule until 1947. Industrialization and the Second Empire. The 19th century was the height of British imperial power. The Industrial Revolution transformed Britain into the world's leading industrial and naval power. Its factories demanded raw materials and markets, which the empire provided. Railways, telegraphs, and steamships connected the far corners of the empire, facilitating trade, governance, and migration. In Africa, British influence expanded rapidly. The Berlin Conference of 1884-85 formalized European claims in Africa, leading to the partitioning of the continent. Britain gained control of Egypt, Sudan, South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, and numerous other territories. In many cases, colonization involved military conquest and subjugation of indigenous peoples. The empire imposed European legal systems, economic structures, and cultural norms. Elsewhere, Britain took control of Burma, Malaya, and Hong Kong, and asserted influence in the Persian Gulf. Australia and New Zealand were settled by British colonists, often at the expense of indigenous populations. Canada gained increasing autonomy, becoming a dominion in 1867, followed by Australia, 1901, New Zealand, 1907, and South Africa, 1910. World Wars and the road to decolonization. The First World War tested the empire's strength. British colonies contributed troops, resources, and support, but the war also revealed the empire's vulnerabilities. Nationalist movements gained momentum, particularly in India and Ireland. The Irish War of Independence led to the creation of the Irish Free State in 1922, while in India, Gandhi's non-violent resistance campaign gained global attention. World War II marked the beginning of the end. Britain's global dominance was challenged by Germany and Japan, and after the war, the United States and Soviet Union emerged as superpowers. Britain was economically weakened and politically overstretched. The pressure for independence in the colonies became irresistible. India gained independence in 1947, leading to the partition into India and Pakistan. This was followed by a wave of decolonization across Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean. Ghana became the first sub-Saharan African colony to gain independence in 1957, followed by Nigeria, Kenya, Uganda, Zambia, and others throughout the 1960s and 70s. The Caribbean saw independence movements in Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and other islands. Legacy and the modern Commonwealth. Though the empire largely dissolved by the late 20th century, its legacy endures. Many former colonies remain part of the Commonwealth of Nations, a voluntary organization promoting economic cooperation, cultural exchange, and shared values. English remains a global lingua franca, and British legal, educational, and governmental systems influence numerous countries. However, the legacy of the empire is deeply contested. While some emphasize the benefits of infrastructure, modernization, and global interconnectedness, others highlight the violence, exploitation, racism, and economic dependency it created. The scars of colonialism are still evident in social inequalities, border conflicts, and cultural dislocation. Today, Britain continues to grapple with its imperial past. Debates about statues, reparations, curriculum reform, and institutional racism are part of a broader reckoning with the history and consequences of empire. Understanding the British Empire is essential to understanding the modern world. It was an empire built on trade, sustained by force, justified by ideology, and ended by resistance. Its history is not a single story, but a vast web of interwoven narratives of power and resistance, ambition and exploitation, transformation and legacy. The sun may have set on the British Empire, but its light, both illuminating and shadowed, continues to shape the world we live in today. Individual colonies and case studies. Detailed accounts of specific British colonies such as India, Kenya, Jamaica, Australia, and Hong Kong illustrate the diverse forms of administration and resistance. In Kenya, the Mau Mau uprising of the 1950s exposed the brutality of colonial repression. In Australia, the legacy of British colonization is deeply intertwined with the dispossession and marginalization of Aboriginal peoples. Hong Kong's handover in 1997 symbolized the last significant transfer of British colonial authority, closing a chapter of direct imperial governance. Post-independence transitions. The transition from colony to independent nation was complex and often turbulent. Many countries inherited deeply entrenched inequalities, arbitrary borders, and economic structures designed for colonial benefit. The process of nation-building involved reconciling diverse ethnic, religious, and linguistic groups, managing Cold War dynamics, and negotiating international development aid. Socio-cultural impacts. British rule left a profound mark on the cultures of its former colonies. English literature, sports like cricket and football, legal systems and parliamentary government became enduring aspects of post-colonial identity. At the same time, resistance movements produced rich traditions of political thought, art and literature that critiqued imperialism and reasserted local identities. Imperial economics and global trade. Economically, the empire facilitated the extraction of resources and labor from colonies for the benefit of Britain. This created patterns of dependency and underdevelopment that continue to affect post-colonial nations. The empire's infrastructure, railways, ports, and roads, was primarily designed to move goods efficiently to imperial markets. Despite these exploitative patterns, the empire also spurred some industrial and agricultural development. Imperial architecture and urban legacies. The built environment of former colonies often reflects British influence. Grand government buildings, railway stations, churches, and schools built in colonial styles. These structures, often symbols of imperial power, have been reinterpreted or repurposed in independent nations, sometimes serving as museums or heritage sites that preserve memory and provoke dialogue. Migration, diaspora, and identity. The empire facilitated large-scale migrations of laborers, soldiers, administrators, and settlers. This movement created diasporal communities around the world, such as South Asians in East Africa, Chinese in the Caribbean, or Caribbeans in Britain. These communities continue to shape multicultural societies and raise questions about citizenship, belonging, and historical memory. post-colonial identity, and decolonization of knowledge. In recent decades, former colonies and academic institutions have challenged Eurocentric narratives of history. Decolonization of knowledge seeks to elevate indigenous epistemologies, rewrite histories from non-imperial perspectives, and acknowledge the voices of those marginalized under empire. This intellectual movement aims to reframe global history with justice, equity, and inclusivity. Legacy and the modern Commonwealth. Though the British Empire had largely dissolved by the late 20th century, its legacy remains deeply embedded in global institutions, international relations, and the internal dynamics of many former colonies. Today, over 50 countries that were once part of the British Empire are members of the Commonwealth of Nations, a voluntary association aimed at promoting political cooperation, economic development, and cultural exchange. While the Commonwealth no longer holds political authority, it reflects the enduring connections shaped by centuries of imperial rule. One of the most visible legacies is the widespread use of the English language. It functions as a global lingua franca, not only in diplomacy and business, but also in education, law, and science. British legal and parliamentary systems have had a lasting influence on governance structures in many former colonies, and common law traditions continue to shape judicial systems from Canada to India to Nigeria. At the same time, the empire's legacy is controversial and frequently contested. While some emphasize the development of infrastructure, education, and global trade networks as positive outcomes, others focus on the systemic exploitation, racial hierarchies, cultural suppression, and economic inequalities left in the empire's wake. These dualities are visible in contemporary social and political debates across the former empire. In many post-colonial societies, the effects of colonial boundaries, imposed economic structures, and disrupted cultural traditions continue to influence political instability, identity conflicts, and uneven development. The legacy of empire is also a point of contention within Britain itself. In recent years, there has been growing debate over how the imperial past is represented in public monuments, school curricula, and national memory. Movements calling for the removal of colonial Sierra statues, demands for reparations, and campaigns to decolonize education reflect an ongoing process of reassessment. Understanding the British Empire is not just a matter of examining the past, it is essential for making sense of the present. The empire shaped patterns of migration, race relations, economic dependency, and global power structures that still affect international dynamics today. A full reckoning with this history requires confronting both the material and psychological dimensions of colonialism and recognizing the diverse experiences of those who lived under its rule. The British Empire was driven by a combination of economic ambition, strategic interests, and ideological justifications. It expanded through commerce and conquest, was administered through a complex mix of direct rule and local collaboration, and ultimately unraveled through a combination of resistance movements, global political shifts, and internal re-evaluation. Its end marked not just the conclusion of a historical phase, but the beginning of a post-colonial world whose contours continue to evolve. Conclusion: a living legacy. The British Empire was a global phenomenon whose legacy remains vivid and contested. Its impact on language, governance, economics, culture, and international relations cannot be overstated. To understand today's geopolitical and socio-economic dynamics, one must understand the history of empire. From the rise of early trading posts to the independence of modern nations, from violent conquest to vibrant multicultural societies, the British Empire's story is both a record of dominance and a chronicle of resistance, innovation, and resilience. Its history is not over, but evolving, carried forward in debates, institutions, identities, and dreams of a more equitable world.